I never liked taking calls from my father, not since I started college, and especially not when my phone buzzed at 8:34 a.m. on a Wednesday in April, a time when I was deep into debugging code for my final project. I'd carved out those precious morning hours in my cramped Boston State dorm room to chase after a spark of clarity I'd found the night before, but when I saw Dad light up my screen, a familiar knot tightened in my stomach. I hesitated before answering, glancing at Chloe, who was sipping coffee from a mug decorated with yellow ducks, her eyes silently asking if I needed saving. "Emily," Dad barked. He never asked if it was a good time. "I need you to be at your sister's wedding. No exceptions. If you skip, I'll cut off your tuition. That's final." He said it as if he were confirming a wire transfer or closing a deal, not like he was talking to his youngest daughter. My mind went blank for a second, then jump-started with a list of obligations, finals, my capstone presentation, and my own graduation, none of which my family had shown much interest in. I forced myself to keep my voice steady. "Dad, that weekend is right before my finals. I have a presentation for my advisor and my graduation is." He cut me off with the brisk certainty of someone who'd never had to worry about rent. "You're not skipping your sister's big day for some science stuff. Family comes first. I won't argue this with you." Chloe's head snapped up, her lips pressed into a line. She mouthed, "Are you okay?" But I just nodded, my hand gripping the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. I swallowed. "I just need to be clear, if I'm not there, you'll stop paying my tuition? After everything?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes, Emily. I mean it. This family supports those who support it. You need to learn that." The call ended before I could say another word. Chloe set her mug down, the porcelain clinking against the worn desk. "He can't do that, can he?" I let out a shaky breath. "He absolutely can. He's done it before. When Olivia took a semester off, he threatened to sell her car if she didn't register for classes by Monday." Chloe shook her head. "He's making your life a business transaction. That's not how families work." I wanted to argue, but the evidence was everywhere. The year before, I'd asked my dad for $100 to buy a programming textbook, and he'd given me a speech about hard work and not relying on handouts, then told me to figure it out myself. I'd picked up 2 extra shifts shelving books at the library and told myself I was just building resilience, but really I was building walls. "Are you going to give in?" Chloe asked softly, watching my face. I shrugged, unable to meet her gaze. "What choice do I have? My scholarships don't cover everything. If I lose tuition, I lose my apartment, my job offer, everything I've worked for." Chloe reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "It isn't fair. He doesn't even know what you're really doing here." That was the heart of it. No one in my family did. To them, I was the daughter who barely scraped by, the girl whose life was a series of struggles. I'd let them believe it, because fighting for recognition in my family felt like shouting into the void. But the truth was, while Dad saw me as a liability, I was quietly becoming my own best asset. After Chloe left for her morning class, the dorm felt smaller. I stared at my laptop, lines of code blurring into meaningless symbols. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a world where my father valued my achievements, not just Olivia's wedding plans. The thought was more exhausting than all-night coding. I got up and pulled open my desk drawer, feeling for the green folder I kept hidden beneath stacks of syllabi. Inside was the life I'd built in secret, award certificates, a letter from the dean congratulating me on my research, my official job offer from Halcyon Systems, and the graduation speech I'd written but never shared. I traced the embossed seal on the job offer, thinking of the hours I'd spent in the library, the weekends I'd skipped parties to code algorithms, the nights I'd spent silently crying from stress, always out of sight. The difference between me and my father was simple. He believed value came from control. I'd learned it was forged in perseverance, in doing the work nobody noticed. I'd never thrown myself a parade, but every step, every late night, every no that I turned into a quiet victory, it mattered. I sat back, folder in my lap, my thumb brushing the edge of the letterhead. "I'll go to the wedding," I whispered, voice steady now, even if no one else could hear me. But not as the failure they think I am. For a long time I just sat there, letting the morning drift past. My hands shook as I closed the folder and slid it back in the drawer. But it wasn't fear that made them tremble this time. It was the recognition, sharp and sweet, that I was finally, in my own quiet way, refusing to be invisible. Outside, the city carried on, horns blaring, the promise of spring in the air. For the first time in years, I felt something shifting inside me, a tiny rebellion that no ultimatum could silence. Maybe my father would never see me as more than a line item on his budget, but I was done shrinking to fit his expectations. There's a saying, you can't choose the family you're born into, but you can choose who you become in spite of them. I intended to prove it. The thing about blending in is you get too good at it. You learn to step lightly, to let the bright laughter and easy chatter of others wash over you without leaving a mark. 2 days before Olivia's wedding, I stood at the entrance of the Lexington Country Club in my simple navy dress, watching the bridesmaids cluster like a flock of exotic birds. Their dresses sparkled beneath the twinkling string lights, their laughter rising above the gentle hum of a string quartet. For a moment, I considered turning around and leaving, slipping out the way I came, and no one would notice. But I was always too polite for that. I approached the bar to buy myself a seltzer, not wanting to risk a glass of champagne on an empty stomach. The bartender glanced at my name tag, which read only Emily in block letters, and smiled. "I'm sorry, are you one of Olivia's college friends?" he asked. I tried not to let my face betray anything. "No," I replied softly. "I'm her sister." He blinked, surprise flickering over his face, then nodded and looked away. I sipped my drink and let my eyes wander the room. Everywhere I looked, Olivia was the sun radiant, pulling every gaze her way. Her laughter echoed off the high ceilings. She didn't see me, not really. Even when she breezed by to hand out bridesmaids' gifts, her hand landed on my shoulder for a second too long, as if searching for my name. Later, as the photographer assembled the family for a photo, he positioned the Carters by height. "Let's get Mom and Dad in the middle, then the beautiful bride," and he paused, looking past me to Olivia's college roommate. "Oh, we're missing one of the bridesmaids." Olivia, without missing a beat, gestured to the group. "It's fine, just go ahead." My place in the family photo disappeared, as if I were a guest in my own story. I slipped away from the camera flash and found myself at a table in the corner, beneath a chandelier that scattered rainbows across the tablecloth. The place card in front of me bore only my first name, no Carter, no roll, no clue to my connection. My fork rested where the salad should have been. During dinner, conversation swirled like water around a stone. Olivia and Ethan told the table about their honeymoon plans, Santorini, 5-star hotels, a private chef. Nancy, my mother, beamed with pride, nodding at every word, while Douglas, Dad, kept an eye on the staff, always making sure everything ran on schedule. No one asked about Boston State, my major, or my own graduation. Instead, they exchanged inside jokes about Olivia's high school friends, recounted Ethan's exploits at Princeton, and toasted to the future. At one point, I caught a snippet of conversation as Olivia leaned in close to Ethan, giggling. I wonder if Emily is even passing her classes. She never talks about school. Ethan smiled, clueless. Maybe she's on probation or something? They both laughed. The sound landed with a dull thud inside me. I thought of Olivia's engagement dinner last year, when I arrived late after a lab shift. I'd scanned the seating chart for my name, only to find a table for family friends in the far corner. No one noticed, and I said nothing, carrying my disappointment like a secret. Tonight was just a bigger, more expensive version of that same erasure. After dinner, I wandered outside for air. The night smelled of clipped grass and lilacs, spring teasing the edge of a chilly breeze. I watched the bridesmaids gather for selfies, their arms looped together, squealing over matching jewelry boxes. My phone buzzed in my clutch, but it was only a reminder about my capstone deadline, blinking as if to remind me of the life waiting beyond this wedding. Returning inside, I made my way toward the coat room, meaning to retrieve my wrap before the speeches began. As I reached for my mother's purse to check for my car keys, she always hid them to keep me from leaving too early. A thin slip of paper fluttered to the floor. I bent to pick it up and paused, recognition prickling along my spine, a printed receipt from the bank. The amount stunned me, $50,000, transferred from my parents' account to Olivia and Ethan Wedding Fund. Scrawled in my mother's precise script beneath the transaction, for Olivia's dreams. With love, Mom and Dad. I stared at the receipt, feeling the room tilt slightly. $50,000. Just months ago, when I'd asked Dad to help with the cost of a required textbook for my advanced algorithms class, he'd said, "We're tight on money right now, Emily. You'll have to figure it out." I always did. Champagne flutes sparkled on the tables, untouched. My own place card still read Emily. Conversations around me ebbed and flowed, polite, rehearsed, never quite reaching me. I felt the sharp ache of absence, not just of attention, but of recognition, of being seen. For a while, I just stood in the hallway, turning the receipt over and over in my hands. I didn't cry. Maybe it was because I'd already used up all my tears on this family, or maybe it was because the hurt had finally turned to something else, a calm, cold clarity. I slipped the receipt into my pocket, pressed my fingers against the paper as if memorizing its weight. On my way back to the ballroom, I passed by Olivia laughing with her bridesmaids, Ethan recounting a story from college, my father speaking with the event planner about schedules. My mother caught my eye but quickly looked away, smoothing her dress, avoiding the questions she knew I'd never ask. I took out my phone, my hand steady, and scrolled to Aunt Linda's number. The only person who ever looked for me in a crowd. I stepped outside again, the chill biting at my arms. The stars were just beginning to appear, scattered above the golf course, indifferent and bright. I stared at the receipt, then at my own hands, pale in the light. "That's it," I whispered, the words barely more than breath. I pressed call, holding the phone close to my ear, waiting for Aunt Linda to answer. Somewhere inside, a door quietly closed. But another, one I'd been afraid to touch, had just begun to open. I used to say, I'm majoring in education because it was what my family expected. The words slid off my tongue so easily in those brief phone calls with Mom, harmless, unremarkable. She'd ask how my classes were going, and I'd reply with something generic about student teaching, lesson plans, classroom management. It was safer that way, blending in, letting their assumptions carry the weight of the conversation. If I told the truth about computer science, algorithms, or the way code sometimes felt like poetry, I risked another dismissive sigh, another glazed look, another reminder that I'd never shine quite as bright as Olivia. The night before the wedding, I found myself alone in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by fragments of a girl I barely recognized. Debate ribbons hung in a faded cluster above my desk, the colors dulled by years of sunlight and dust. A bookshelf leaned against the far wall, still stuffed with wide novels and half-finished diaries. On the corkboard, old birthday cards and Polaroids curled at the edges. It should have felt comforting, but the nostalgia was a hollow ache. I wasn't the quiet kid who tiptoed around Olivia's moods anymore. I'd outgrown those shadows, even if no one in this house noticed. I sat cross-legged on the quilt my grandmother made, my phone glowing in my lap. Chloe called first, her voice a lifeline from my real world. "You hanging in there?" she asked, soft and direct as always. "I'm surviving," I replied. "Barely." I glanced at my laptop bag, already packed with everything I'd need for graduation, if I dared to show up. It's weird being here. Like I'm a guest in my own life. "You don't have to go through this alone, Em. If you want, I'll drive up for the wedding. I can fake a southern accent and pretend to be your long-lost cousin," Chloe offered, a smile in her voice. I laughed, the tension in my chest easing just a little. "Thanks, but I think Olivia would notice. She has a radar for things that don't fit her plan." Daniel called next, just as I was folding my graduation gown. He was the practical one, all logical solutions and gentle reminders. "You have everything ready for tomorrow?" he asked. "Almost." I smoothed a crease from the sleeve. "Gown, cap, speech, and my escape plan, just in case." He hesitated. "Are you sure you want to keep hiding all of this? The job offer, the research, all the stuff that actually matters." I picked up the printed email from Halcyon Systems, the official letterhead heavy in my hands. "I'm not hiding it forever. Just until I'm ready. It's complicated, Dan. Life's always complicated with families like yours. But you've earned every bit of this. Maybe it's time to let them see who you really are." His words stuck with me after we hung up. I moved through the room, the ritual of packing grounding me. Each item had a story. The battered notebook from my first algorithms class, the flash drive with my winning code from the state competition, the research paper I'd co-authored late into the night at the library. None of these things had ever made it into a conversation at the dinner table. I'd learned to collect my victories in secret, stacking them quietly like coins in a hidden jar. A wave of exhaustion swept over me as I remembered the library night shifts. For nights a week, I'd shelve books until 2 a.m., hands numb, eyes gritty, mind racing with ideas. I'd spend breaks coding at the back desk, fueled by vending machine coffee and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. Every dollar went to tuition, every spare moment to mastering what no one believed I could do. Once, after winning the regional programming contest, I'd brought the trophy home, only to tuck it under my bed when no one asked why I was late for Sunday dinner. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Aunt Linda, the only person in the family who ever seemed to listen for the truth between the lines. I put her on speaker. "I just wanted to hear your voice, sweetheart," she said. "You holding up okay?" I took a shaky breath. "Honestly, I feel like I'm split in two. There's the me they see, and then there's everything I've worked for, all the things I'm proud of, and it's like I have to hide that just to keep the peace." Linda was silent for a beat, then repeated what she'd told me years ago. "You don't need to shout to be seen, Emily. Just show up when it matters. You decide what that means." Her faith in me was a balm, soothing the raw places the rest of the family never even noticed. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to be brave enough to stand in the light, no more hiding, no more shrinking. Maybe tomorrow, for the first time, I could. After I hung up, I moved to my dresser and pulled open the bottom drawer where I kept the real evidence of my secret life. I laid out my resume, transcripts, acceptance letter, and the glossy folder from Halcyon. I placed them all in a neat stack on top of my bag, my hand lingering over each page as if I could absorb their courage through my fingertips. I folded my graduation gown with deliberate care, smoothing every wrinkle. Next to it, I set the speech I'd drafted, words about perseverance, finding your own path, and the quiet pride that comes from never giving up. I thought about all the nights I'd whispered those lines to myself, daring to believe in a version of Emily that wasn't invisible. On the nightstand sat a photo of me at 9, grinning gap-toothed and triumphant, holding up a blue ribbon from the science fair. I touched the glass, remembering how proud I'd been, how I'd waited for someone to notice, to cheer. That girl had wanted to be seen. The woman I'd become was ready to do it herself. When everything was packed, I zipped the bag closed, but left the folder on top. Just in case, by some miracle, someone in my family finally asked, "Emily, what have you really been doing all these years?" I doubted they would. But for once, I was prepared to answer. My heart was pounding not with fear, but with a kind of hope I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. I turned off the lamp and slipped into bed, the graduation gown draped over my chair like a silent promise. Tomorrow, I would show up as myself, not the version they wanted, but the truth I'd carried alone. For the first time, I looked forward to the morning. Wedding days are supposed to feel magical, or at least that's what the movies teach you. But on Olivia's wedding day, as sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows of Willow Creek Garden Chapel and the air filled with the scent of peonies and fresh grass, I felt less like a participant and more like a prop placed just off stage. My palms sweated as I clutched my note cards, tucked safely inside my purse, words I'd rewritten a dozen times and still wasn't sure I'd get to say. I arrived early, slipping into the side door like a guest who didn't want to be noticed. The back room buzzed with bridesmaids fluffing dresses, adjusting hair, and snapping selfies. Olivia looked up as I entered, her veil slightly askew, her cheeks flushed with nerves. She smiled, then frowned. "Emily, please just be normal tonight, okay? I need everything to be perfect." I nodded, swallowing the urge to ask what normal even meant in a family where being myself had never been quite enough. My mother swept in, smoothing Olivia's veil with quick, practiced hands. She turned to me, her voice low but urgent. "Emily, don't make today about you." She pressed a small card into my palm. I turned it over, guessed, in looping gold script, not sister or family. It stung more than I wanted to admit. Dad passed by in a flurry of instructions about seating charts and the photographer, barely glancing in my direction. The memory flashed through my mind. 8 years old, dressing myself in an itchy tulle skirt for Olivia's elementary school recital because no one remembered to help. I'd sat in the second row, swinging my legs, waiting for someone to notice I was there. No one did. Today felt like an echo of that long-ago night. As the ceremony began, guests streamed in, friends from Olivia's sorority, Ethan's relatives in tailored suits, Dad's colleagues with wives draped in silk. I took my seat in the back row, the guest badge heavy around my neck. The violinist played something light and sweet as sunlight danced across the polished pews. I folded my hands and tried to slow my breathing, mouthing the opening lines of my speech in case I was called to give it. Aunt Linda slipped in beside me, her hand finding mine and giving it a gentle squeeze. "They'll never see you, honey, unless you make them look," she whispered, her voice warm and steady. I squeezed back, grateful for her anchor. "You know," she added, "you don't have to apologize for taking up space. Not today." The ceremony passed in a haze. Olivia floated down the aisle, radiant in lace and tulle, Ethan waiting with a nervous smile. Vows were exchanged, rings slipped on, kisses shared, moments that belonged on Instagram, perfectly staged. I clapped, smiled, watched from my corner. When the photographer called family for pictures on the lawn, Mom hustled Olivia and Dad into place, motioned Ethan's parents forward. Someone handed me a champagne flute and asked, "Would you mind taking a picture for us?" I complied, then drifted to the side, watching my own family assemble in the perfect tableau, minus me. At the reception, guests filled the garden with laughter and the clink of glasses. The head table sparkled with silver and white roses. I found my place at table 12, tucked between Dad's former secretary and a cousin I barely remembered. Every so often, my eyes caught Olivia's, but she was always pulled away by someone more important. After the entrees were cleared, the DJ called for speeches. The best man cracked jokes about Ethan's college days. Olivia's maid of honor toasted the perfect couple. My heart thudded as the DJ announced a special toast, and for a split second, I wondered if I'd been forgotten again. But Olivia's voice rang out, clear and sure. "I want to thank everyone for coming, but especially my little sister, Emily. I know we're not always on the same page," but she faltered, then motioned me forward. "Emily, would you say a few words?" All eyes turned to me, hundreds of them, blinking, curious, some a little impatient. My feet felt rooted to the floor. Aunt Linda's words echoed, "They'll never see you unless you make them look." I stood, my legs trembling, and made my way to the microphone. I scanned the faces in the crowd, Mom dabbing her eyes, Dad frowning, Olivia clutching Ethan's hand, trying to look supportive. The laughter and chatter died away, replaced by an expectant hush. For a moment, I considered reading the speech I'd prepared, the safe, forgettable one full of generic praise and childhood stories. But as I unfolded my note cards, something inside me cracked, and I heard my own voice, calm and steady. "Most of you know me as Olivia's sister. Some of you may not know me at all. That's okay, I've gotten used to that." For a long time, I tried to keep things easy, to go along and not draw attention to myself. I said I was majoring in education because that's what everyone expected. But the truth is, I changed my major years ago. I studied computer science. I worked nights, skipped holidays, poured myself into research that mattered to me. I kept my awards, my grades, even my job offer secret. Not because I was ashamed, but because I never felt safe being myself, not here. I paused, searching the faces in front of me. A nervous laugh rippled through the room, but I held my ground, my hands steady on the podium. Tomorrow, while Olivia and Ethan are on their honeymoon, I'll be graduating summa cum laude from Boston State. Next month, I'll start at Halcyon Systems, doing work I love. I wish I'd shared it sooner, but sometimes the hardest thing is believing your voice deserves to be heard. The crowd was utterly still. I could hear someone clear their throat at the back, a glass clinking softly. I looked at my family. Dad looked stunned. Mom blinked hard. Olivia's face was a swirl of pride and embarrassment. I ended with the only truth I had left, and this time I hope being myself is enough for you. A few polite claps broke the silence. Then others joined in, uncertain at first, but growing in warmth. I stepped down from the podium, my heart hammering, but for once, not out of fear. I met Aunt Linda's eyes across the room, She nodded, her smile fierce with pride. There was no anger in me, only relief, sweetness, and a clarity that felt almost holy. I had been asked to fade into the background one last time. Instead, I'd finally stepped into the light. No one clapped. Not really. There was a smattering of hesitant applause, then a hush so thick I felt it pressing on my skin. When I stepped down from the podium, the air in the Willow Creek ballroom was heavy and close, full of a static I could almost hear. I threaded my way back to table 12, feeling every stare, every curious glance slide over me. It was as if my admission had sucked all the air out of the room, leaving nothing but silence and the clink of silverware. I sat, folding my hands in my lap, feeling my heart beat like a distant drum. Olivia's head was bowed, her hair falling forward to hide her face. The bridesmaids whispered, glancing my way, their laughter brittle, forced. Champagne flutes stood unfinished, beads of condensation rolling down the glass. I stared at the linen napkin in my lap and wondered if I should just slip away out the side door into the night and keep walking until the only sound was the wind in the trees. Olivia was the first to break the silence. She slid into the seat beside me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you just tell us in private?" she asked, her words heavy with something between embarrassment and genuine hurt. "You could have pulled me aside." Or Mom. Did you have to do it like that? I wanted to tell her there was never a right time. That for years I'd waited for someone to ask, to care enough to see beneath the surface. But all I said was, "Would you have listened?" She didn't answer, just shook her head, pressing her lips together as if holding back tears. I watched her fingers pick at a pearl button on her dress, her perfect nails trembling ever so slightly. The clatter of a fork made me look up. Dad was standing by the table, hands shoved deep into his pockets, face unreadable. For a long moment he just stood there, watching me with a mixture of calculation and something softer, almost uncertainty. Finally, he said, "I hope the job is worth it, Emily." "I really do." He sounded tired, older than I'd ever heard him. There was no fury, no outburst. Just a resignation, and then he turned away, merging into the tide of guests, making polite excuses to leave early. Mom appeared a moment later, moving with practiced grace, a small plate in her hands. She set it in front of me, a slice of wedding cake, thick frosting rosettes immaculate and untouched. "You should eat something," she murmured. Then, without meeting my eyes, she tucked a folded piece of notepaper beneath my dessert plate, her hand lingering just a second too long. Before I could say anything, she was gone, her heels clicking a retreat across the dance floor. I sat staring at the plate, the silver fork glinting under the chandeliers. The cake's sweet scent mingled with the tang of champagne and the faint, sharp perfume of roses wilting in their vases. Ethan came by next, slipping into the seat Olivia had vacated. For the first time since meeting him, he looked at me, not through me, with an honest, searching gaze. "That was brave, you know," he said quietly. "I wish I'd known. About all of it. Olivia talks about you, but not like that." He paused, uncertain. "I'm sorry if we ever made you feel less than you are." His words, simple as they were, felt like a tiny thread sewing something closed inside me. "Thank you," I whispered. "I just wanted to finally be seen." He nodded, giving my shoulder a gentle squeeze, then wandered back toward Olivia, who watched him go with unreadable eyes. The ballroom had thinned out. The DJ played something slow, but no one danced. Conversations buzzed in low, awkward waves. The bridesmaids hovered by the dessert table, shoes off, mascara smudged. My Aunt Linda found me, her presence a quiet island amid the choppy social seas. She offered her arm. "Walk with me," she asked. We strolled out onto the garden terrace, the night cool against my bare arms, fireflies drifting just beyond the pool of light from the reception hall. Linda didn't speak at first, letting our footsteps fill the silence. The crunch of gravel, the soft sigh of wind in the hydrangeas, the distant laughter from inside, these small sounds made the tension bearable. Finally, she spoke. "Sometimes, silence is the loudest answer we ever get. That's how you know you shook something loose." She smiled, not unkindly. "You did what you had to do, even if it made them uncomfortable." I thought of Chloe, how she'd once said, "The bigger the silence, the bigger the shift." I could feel the truth of it now, a vibration in the air between all of us. The family I'd grown up with would never be quite the same again. There was grief in that, but also relief. We circled the rose beds, the scent sweet and sharp in the cool air. "Do you think they'll ever accept it?" I asked. Linda squeezed my hand. "They'll have to if they want to keep you in their lives. Or maybe they won't. But you get to decide who you are with or without their applause." We lingered in the darkness, the silence companionable, not condemning. After a while, she kissed my cheek and went back inside. I made my way to an empty bench beneath a string of fairy lights. The hum of cicadas filled the air, a gentle lull after the storm of the evening. I pulled the note from under my plate, smoothing it open with shaking fingers. My mother's handwriting was neat and looping. "I always knew, but I didn't know how to protect you from him. I'm sorry I failed you so often. I'm proud of you, Emily." My throat tightened. I pressed the paper to my chest, eyes stinging. All my life, I'd wanted this, a sign, a thread of truth, a mother's recognition, however late. I looked out over the dark lawn, the wedding lights blinking like fireflies against the night. My reflection shimmered in the window glass, older, braver, more certain than I'd ever been. Maybe, I thought, it's finally time to protect myself. I whispered it out loud, letting the words float on the night air. Maybe it's time to take care of myself. Somewhere inside, I felt a quiet resolve settle in, like the soft closing of a door. There would be consequences, but there would also be freedom. And for the first time, the silence between us didn't feel like defeat. It felt like possibility. I didn't go back to Boston right away. Instead, I let Aunt Linda convince me to spend a weekend at her cabin on the lake, tucked among pines in upstate New York. I told myself it was only a pause before my new life began, but the first morning I woke to the hush of birdsong and sunlight on the water, I realized how long it had been since I'd truly let myself be still. I moved barefoot across the weathered planks of the deck, a mug of tea warming my hands. The air was cool, touched with the sweetness of pine needles and something wild. I breathed it in, filling my lungs, feeling space return inside my chest. For once, the only soundtrack was the breeze through the trees and the steady beat of my own heart. I spent hours outside, writing in my journal, wading along the shore, letting the lake water lap at my toes. Sometimes Aunt Linda would join me with her book, sometimes not. We settled into an easy silence, interrupted only by shared meals and laughter when the neighbor's dog chased ducks into the water. On the second day, I video chatted with Chloe. She turned the camera to show our little apartment, nearly lost under a forest of floral bouquets. "All from Halcyon Systems," she grinned. "You'd think you won the Nobel Prize or something, Em. Also, the fridge is stuffed with fancy chocolate, congrats, by the way." We talked about everything and nothing, and when I closed the call, I felt an unexpected ache, homesickness, but also gratitude. For friends who saw me, even when I doubted myself. Later, Daniel called. "The CS department wants you to speak at our graduation," he said, his voice alive with excitement. "You could inspire a whole new wave of invisible nerds." I laughed, the sound surprising me with how light it was. "I'll think about it," I promised. Back on the deck, I scribbled in my journal, words pouring out, not for anyone else but me. I wrote about the wedding, the speech, the way silence can hurt more than shouting. I wrote about choosing my path and the relief of letting go. I wrote, "I am not a footnote." Not anymore. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from Dad. No words, just an empty bubble read. I stared at it for a long time, wondering what he meant. Maybe it was an attempt at connection, maybe just an acknowledgement of distance. I let it sit unanswered. A few minutes later, another message appeared, this one from Mom. It was a photo, me at the microphone, eyes bright, mid-sentence, the caption underneath in her neat script, "So proud of you, Emily." I smiled, the tension in my shoulders dissolving. I didn't reply, but for the first time, I felt truly seen. Maybe it was enough. That evening, Linda lit a fire in the stone hearth. I sorted through the folder of old papers I'd brought, transcripts, letters, programs from every event I'd ever attended as Olivia's sister. At the bottom, I found the forged letter I'd written years ago, the one claiming I was still an education major. I held it in my hands, laughing softly at how desperate I'd once been to please, to be small and safe. I knelt by the fireplace, fed the letter to the flames, and watched it curl into ash. The act felt ceremonial, letting go of who I'd pretended to be, making room for who I'd become. The firelight flickered across the walls, painting the room with warmth and shadows. I felt the laughter rising in my chest, bright and clear. Outside, the moon cast silver on the lake. I walked out onto the dock one last time, cool planks beneath my feet, the world wide and open around me. I let the silence settle, no longer heavy, but full of promise. Back inside, I opened my laptop, my fingers poised above the keyboard. I typed, "Emily Carter, computer science graduate." For the first time, I didn't minimize the window or hide my screen. I hit upload, letting the truth find its place in the world. As the page refreshed, I caught my reflection in the glass. I didn't see a shadow, or a supporting character, or a footnote in someone else's story. I saw myself, whole, resilient, quietly proud. The journey wasn't over. There would be new challenges, new moments of doubt. But now I face them as Emily, just Emily, finally enough. Looking back on these days, I realize how much courage it took just to let myself be seen, truly and honestly. Family doesn't always get it right, but sometimes learning to stand up for ourselves can open a new kind of understanding, even if it starts with silence. I've learned that our worth isn't measured by approval, but by the quiet dignity of embracing who we are, flaws and all. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of your own journey, I'd be glad to hear your thoughts. Sometimes, sharing our experiences is the first step toward healing, so feel free to leave a comment or pass this story along to someone who might need it today.